So not that long ago, there was an Australian cricketer called Merv Hughes. He's mostly famous for having a mustache, but he also went on to be an Australian selector for a little while. And this was quite interesting, as he probably wasn't seen as a normal kind of selector, but I think they were, trying to find different kinds of players with different kinds of backgrounds to see what they could find. And so Merv Hughes was the Australian selector for a while. And then it turned out that Merv Hughes wasn't actually watching all that much cricket. Part of the reason was he was still part of the amateur side of selection at that point. And so he wasn't actually paid to do the job. And so when he was available and he would go down, or Cricket Australia would give him a per diem or whatever, he would be able to travel around and see some cricket. But the thing is that Merv Hughes couldn't watch as much cricket as other people because he didn't have a Foxtel subscription, and that allowed you to watch all the overseas cricket at that time. And even now, if you're an Australian cricket fan and you want to watch anything that's not at home, you pretty much have to have a subscription with it. And Merv did not. So he was selecting the Australian team, and unless he was there on a tour, which sometimes he was because he would actually host tour groups, more often than not, he didn't actually see that much of Australian cricket. He also didn't have access to watching all the different domestic games. A lot of them were also on Foxtel. So it turned out that the Australian selector at that point wasn't actually watching that much cricket. And that was pretty normal. If you go back to county cricket not that long ago, it would be the board who was deciding who was actually going to get the contract at the end of the next year, not the captain or the coach. Quite often it was people who didn't even have any sort of cricket background, who just got themselves onto a board, deciding if you were good enough to get a contract for the following year. And of course, if you go back a little bit further again, you'll find that when Test cricket first started, and for a very, very long time, quite often the home ground would decide on who played for the Test team, right? It was so random. In the West Indies, they would have a different captain like all the time. And in England, you would have very different 11s for different games based on who was popular in that area. It was such a bizarre way of picking cricket. But the point being is that selection in cricket has always been pretty haphazard and a little bit amateur. And we're finally getting to a more professional side of things, right? Scouting has become a big thing. And it was probably England who first worked out that if you want someone to tell you if someone is a good wicketkeeper, sending a bowler or a batter to have a look maybe doesn't make as much sense as getting someone who is a former wicketkeeper to go and rate them. And they did this with all sorts of people. They did it with, former seamers, fast bowlers, spinners, wicketkeepers, opening batters. They tried to have as many scouts as possible. But of course, a scouting network costs a lot of money, and cricket boards don't really like spending money. So realistically, it was the franchise, and specifically the IPL, who really started scouting in cricket, which is very different than selection. Because for selection, you're really just looking at the next tour and perhaps the next 11. Whereas scouting, you might be looking towards the future. And it means that there are now a lot of people around the world with different kinds of cricket background who quite often do scouting for different teams. I've been asked on occasions to do that for a few different teams, sometimes working directly for them, sometimes providing the scouting reports for other companies who are giving it to them. But scouting is very, very different from selection. It's a lot more professional, it's a lot more wide-ranging, and it's very modern sport, whereas selection is very much people who don't have access to TV, old people on boards that we don't even understand why they're involved, and a home ground deciding that they do or don't want a certain player. Scouting is the future, and selection, even if it is related to scouting, is kind of the past. You want to swing wildly at the internet like you've got the new pill in your hand, but you keep getting dead battered. Find the movement you want with NordVPN. They are our protection against terrifying cyber threats and wide-battered geo-blocks. NordVPN will help you get through any rights restrictions so you can watch all the cricket you want. We aren't always happy with the wickets we're on. Sometimes we need a change. NordVPN can switch your virtual location so your IP address is ready to cash in. So if you need to get around the internet's rules, or I suppose in our case laws, select NordVPN. They can help you watch a game on a cheaper stream in another country. Give NordVPN the ball and let them penetrate all your vast internet issues. Because if you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. You can also receive a 20GB daily data voucher. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a big hitter is coming for you at nordvpn.com/KIMBER right now. This piece largely comes from an article I read recently. Stephen Finn was an England opening bowler. He took 125 wickets at 30 in Test cricket, and he took 102 wickets at 29 in ODIs. He is now only 36 years old. So he's weirdly someone who's very experienced in cricket, is still young enough to be playing it at the top level, but because he's a fast bowler, he's now more of a commentator. but occasionally he does some writing as well. And he wrote a piece for the BBC where he was talking about how different selection is now than when he played. And he was kind of comparing these players here. Cook, who went on to be picked, versus Zimbabwe, and Baker and Turner. Cook is very much the old school model. If you watch him bowl, you see him bowl for hours on end, nagging away at the top of the stumps. I think Finney describes him as an English style seamer. These other two guys are more what you would call, modern seamers or international seamers. So slightly different. But Cook has an incredible record where he averages less than 20 in first-class cricket, has more than 300 first-class victims, and has been playing forever, and has slowly got himself into a situation where England are like, maybe he is the bowler we should be looking at, right? Baker and Turner really haven't played all that much cricket at all. And so traditionally, a player like Cook would have a big advantage over someone like Baker and Turner, especially in English cricket. But that isn't quite the situation anymore. And there's a few reasons for that. One is MV play. And I don't just mean MV play here, although I do specifically mean MV play here, despite the fact that they're partners with us. But the ability now for MV play means that you don't actually have to be at the ground. If you hear that someone has played well, you can go and you can find all the balls that they have bowled. So if Baker and Turner don't actually play that many games, chances are that MV play will have something filmed that the selectors will still be able to go and look at, right? That is a huge difference from the old days where sometimes players might have been picked like Baker and Turner, but it would almost be on like one person say so. Right now, someone could say that one of these guys is really good, and then you can go to MV play and you can have a look at it. But the other big difference between these players is this is a player with a very high floor. Even Cook on his worst game, and he didn't play particularly well in his first test, he's going to bowl more or less at the stumps and give you some kind of control all the way through, right? These guys are players with very high ceilings. And there's always been, and always within cricket selection and really any sport at all, you're always looking at whether you want a player who isn't going to fail very much, but is very consistent, or if you're looking for players who could be anything if you give them a chance. The high ceiling players quite often have a low floor. And the reason there is they are still prospects, right? You're not 100% sure what they can do, but maybe they have pace or extravagant movement or something really, really special. And you're like, well, if they can work out all the other parts of their game, they've got a very high ceiling. Conversely, of course, that means that they have a low floor because at the moment they don't really know their game all that well. And so they could just fail. They might not actually end up being great players at all. They could actually be busts, right? Whereas Cook is very different. Chances are that Cook's ceiling isn't that high. As talented as he is, it may not translate to the international game in the same way that it has in county cricket. So with Cook, you've got a player whose ceiling probably isn't that high, right? Like when you think about it, he's going to need conditions to be in his favor, probably more often than not. He's not particularly fast. He can't bowl your bounces. There's a few different things that he can't do. But his floor is also quite high because he's not ever going to come in and just not be able to hit the cut strip, right? He's always going to be able to do some kind of job for you. Even if you use him as a medium pacer with the keeper up at the stumps, he's always got something that he's going to be handy for, and he's nipping the ball around quite consistently. How this all relates back to what Finn says is really interesting. Because in the old days, players like Cook had a natural advantage. You saw them bowling all the time. Over a certain period, they would build up a resume. Everyone on the circuit would sort of see them, talk about them, and then when there was a position available for them, suddenly someone like Cook would be picked. This is the era when first-class cricket was respected a lot more. And so someone like Cook, who was really good at first-class cricket, does it a lot, takes all these wickets, would just be put into the side automatically. That's kind of how Finn saw his career as well. He would, over time, get to a point where he could put himself into a position where, from first-class cricket, he could be picked for England. The difference now is the MV play situation, where even if you haven't seen a lot of Baker and Turner, you've seen enough to be like, oh, but if they're fit and the ball's coming out well, we could still give them a go. But I would suggest the second one is also highlights. We now have a very highlight-dependent cricket system, right? When you see first class now, you'll quite often just see a collection of the best balls bowled by any of these guys, right? And the best balls from Baker and Turner probably look a little bit more sexy than a 77-mile-an-hour in-dipper from Cook. It's still sexy, but there's something about the faster bowlers that is always going to pop. So we are in our highlights era, or if you want to get NBA with it, our mixtapes era, right? So a lot of potential NBA players over the last few years have found that having a really sexy mixtape, which is a highlights package that is sometimes put to music, that has their most athletic skills, maybe their best shooting and everything else, is sometimes enough to get them on the radar of NBA teams. In fact, I had a friend who played college basketball like 20 years ago, and it was one of the things he asked me to make for him. And that is because there are so many players to be picking from at any one time that if you can stand out in any way, like with a mixtape, then you're more of a chance for an NBA team to take a look at you. There was an Australian basketballer a few years ago called Thon Maker, who's a 7-foot guy who can shoot really well. And so if you looked at his mixtape, he would block shots, he would shoot the ball really well, and it looked incredible. He seemed like a player with a very high floor, but also with a really high ceiling. That's exactly what you want in a prospect. The issue was, if you actually watched Thon Maker play in games, he got lost a little bit, he didn't move particularly well sideways, and he didn't end up becoming a successful NBA player. And that's because anyone can edit a highlights package to make someone look pretty good, and certainly better than they are. And that's one of the things that Finn is kind of talking about at the moment. We're not quite at the mixtape level for cricket right now, but we're actually not that far away. And I could say this because I know there are people who work with agents who already make cricket versions of mixtapes, right? And in the old days, you were looking for first-class success, right? Whereas these days, you're looking for bowlers with a high release point. You're looking at a batter who's brilliant against rapid pace. You're looking at someone who can smash spin. It's not that you don't see these things in first class, but you might see some of these things in franchise leagues. You might see some of them on NV Play. You're really just looking for these sorts of archetypes of players. So you don't need to watch hours and hours of first class cricket. You just need to say, our team needs this, this, or this, and then you go off and find it. I think this has been happening in cricket for a long time. A lot of cricket now runs on WhatsApp, or a variation of WhatsApp, but a messaging service, right? And people are always trading messages with each other, especially when it comes to scouting, seeing different kinds of players. For instance, I remember WhatsApping some general managers and some agents about Kyle Jamieson before kind of anyone knew who he was, because I had stumbled across him, right? And often teams will send me WhatsApps of different players going, what do you think of this? Do you think this is repeatable? Do you think this is something that could work in a T20 franchise? So WhatsApp already plays a big part. And we know all this because one of the most famous examples already is in the English team. Ben Stokes was looking at something, probably a highlight from MV Play, and it was Shoaib Bashir. He sees this incredible delivery by Shoaib Bashir. Stokes sends it through to the selection committee, and now Shoaib Bashir is in the national team. He's not in the national team for being really good in first-class cricket because he hasn't been that good in first-class cricket. He's really in the international team because it was a highlight or a mixtape. It's probably more of a highlight in this case. MV Play was involved. Stokes had a look at it on his phone. He thought Bashir looked good. He sends it off to selection. And now Shoaib Bashir is a test player. We have already entered cricket's mixtape era. Brian Lara used pot plants to work on his placement. John Wright glued his glove to his bat. Sachin Tendulkar dug up practice pitches. Tatenda Taibu cut the top off his bat. Claire Taylor used a hockey grip. Steve Smith was from tennis. Dean Jones would call phantom runs, and Victor Trumper turned the nets into a war zone to survive. The best batters in the world do whatever they have to make runs. We have told their stories in our new book, The Art of Batting.